Paul will be in conversation with Paula McCann, the author of 7 novels, 3 collections of short stories, and 2 works of nonfiction. Born and raised in Dublin, Ireland, he has been the recipient of many international honors, including the U.S. National Book Award, the International Dublin Literary Prize, and an Oscar nomination. In 2017, he was elected to the American Academy of Arts. His work has been published in over 40 languages. He is the president and co-founder of the nonprofit global story exchange organization Narrative 4, and he is the Thomas Hunter Writer in Residence at Hunter College in New York, where he lives with his wife, Allison, and their family, some of whom are here this evening. His first major nonfiction book, American Mother, will be published, or was just published in January 2024.
No, will be published.
Will be published.
Yeah,
It's coming. Look out for it. Without further ado, I will turn it over to you both. Thanks so much.
Thank you. All right, listen, we've got to figure this out. You're going to look that way. I'm going to kind of look this way, right? And then at some stage we might switch and do it up. Look, but before we begin, can you just like raise your leg in the air and show people your socks?
Well, I was in Dubai and I was wearing these socks and I didn't really think
Okay, you
much
got to
about
stand
it.
up. Look, people got to stand up.
Okay,
Raise
hold on.
the leg in the air. For God's
Okay, you can see,
There we
right? My hamstrings are a bit tight, sorry. But I was wearing these socks, and afterwards, you know, there was a lovely big book signing queue, and a lot of people kept saying to me, "Gosh, I love how coordinated you are today. You look like the cover of the book." And I thought, "Oh, I get it now. You see, right?" So the white and the orange and the black. So here I am. I just thought I'd save the socks for New York.
It's the prophet song. I'm going to tell you,
Prophet socks. Sorry.
prophet songs. I'm going to tell you that I did absolutely zero preparation for this interview tonight. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I did zero because I'll tell you why. Because I read this book before it came out, and it was sent to me by a good friend of both of ours. It said, you know, can you have a look at this book? I think there's something really stunning going on. Cormac Kinsella is his name. And I trust Cormac. He's a great friend. And I sat down, and over the course of a weekend, I was stunned by it, and I knew what I was in presence of. And I wrote about it. I thought I wrote back immediately. And what was interesting to me was like yesterday thinking about, okay, I gotta beef up on the book, and I don't have to beef up on the book because it's sort of behind my retina. It's burned in extraordinary ways. It's also burned behind my heart in extraordinary ways, and I can still remember the texture of going through it and thinking, okay, I'm in the presence now of something that is really working. So thank you for it.
Thank you for those words.
If my questions are off tonight, but I still remember the hero's name, and I still remember all sorts of things about it. Paul, it's been a long journey.
It has been a long journey. It's been a bumpy journey. I often tell writing students that resilience is actually more important than talent.
That's right.
So many people with talent fall by the wayside because there are moments when you're going to be tested. And sometimes it's not about the writing. It's not about the quality of the writing. It's not about the novel you produced. It's just about timing, or it's about the sheer love of novels being published at the time. I've been very lucky in my career that from the start I've received, you know, largely really, really tremendously good reviews. There's been a few stinkers along the way, but that's normal. That's how it is.
My mother wrote one of those.
My mother is secretly up to no good. There's a gentleman just sitting there called Francis Giffard, who is my French publisher, and Francis was really, really instrumental in putting cement under my feet because you know, I broke reasonably well in France, and that was very important for my career because then there's a certain validation. Right. People see, oh, he's winning prizes in France. Why is that happening? Why are we not paying attention to him here? I remember you saying this. We had a drink in Saint-Malo 10 years ago, maybe 9 years ago, something like that, and you talked about that, and it's the same thing happened to you. And I've had some moments where it's been tough.
Right.
And so I really appreciate what's happened to me now because, for example, after like I think my second book sold maybe 400 copies in Ireland, something like that. And you're dead then. That's it. You're finished. And I knew it. I knew I was in trouble. And
Stamina, desire,
yeah,
perseverance.
yeah.
I mean, it's what I talk to my students about all the time. I think you're entirely right. You can have all the talent and not necessarily be able to produce the great work. It takes a lot of desire. So tell me, I mean, okay, I actually want to go back and kick this down the road, maybe 20 years ago, when you went in as a young journalist on Lower Baggot Street to a newspaper called the Sunday Tribune.
Yeah.
And you had stars in your eyes. You were ready to take over the world. I talked to a lot of the journalists there who remember those years. They were incredible years. Can you just tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about that time?
Well, I was when I look back now, I think it's a bit strange because I was 19.
Yeah.
And I was knocking on the door and I got freelance work as a sub-editor. And I was still in college. And the thing is I was being directed by something that I didn't know what was directing me. And I realize now what it is. You know, Annie Diller tells this story about how, you know, a young writing student goes up to a professor and says, I think I want to be a writer. And you know, and the writer says, well, do you like words in the same way that does a painter like paint? You know, and I liked words. I liked language. I liked sentences. And I wanted to be close to words and sentences. And so I went into the Sunday Tribune and I was very quiet. The next person on the desk was 27 years old. And I think I said nothing for about 2 years, but I watched and I listened and I learned, and they kept giving me more shifts. And then responsibility came. And I was made, I think it was the chief sub-editor of the property section. And that was great fun. But I was editing
Properties.
properties. I mean, this is where I've come from. And I mean, my favorite headline in the property section was which I wrote was about, we had a story about garden gnomes, and there was a picture of 4 garden gnomes I put together like ABBA, and I wrote "gnoming me, gnoming you." And
we should have known at that stage.
That was that, you know, you had to have your fun. But what was actually happening, and I realized this many years later, was, you know, you're in the crucible, you're processing thousands of words every day. There's a lot of pressure. And I was actually shaping my brain around language. And so when I started to write fiction at 30, and I didn't give myself permission at all to write fiction until I was 30, I actually shut that part of my brain down. And when I was 30 and I realized what it was I had to do, and I'll briefly tell the story of that. I was in a taxi on the island of Libr'à in Sicily going up a hill, and I had an epiphany, and I realized that my life was wrong, that I was misaligned and becoming bitter. I loved the journalism, but I needed to stop.
You were a film critic.
I was a film critic at that point, and I realized I needed to write fiction. And so I started writing fiction. And when I sat down to write, I realized that what I'd sort of unconsciously sort of taken from journalism was control, tone, all the things that you need when you write. And so suddenly I found that I was much more ready than I had expected. And also as a film critic, you're watching narrative. You're watching the shaping of narrative. And even the most obscure, fractured, atomized movies are still telling stories. And so I was just shaping my brain. I reviewed over 1,000 films. And so I was watching 5, 6, 7 films every week. And my brain was just being shaped.
But I don't get it. What is the conscious desire to do fiction? And what is fiction, by the way, when you're 30 years old? And how is it different to what you're doing in journalism? Because, folks, in Irish journalism, you get all sorts of incredible talents coming along. I grew up in the Irish papers. John Banville was the copy editor in the Irish press. Ben Kiley was around at those times.
You know, it was on the subs desk with me in the Sunday Tribune, Gavin Corbett.
Well, there you go.
I mean,
There you
it was
go.
astonishing.
So there's a discipline that comes from journalism, but I'm interested in 30-year-old you saying, oh, I'm ready to write fiction. So what did fiction mean to you? And what does the word fiction mean to you now? And how is it different to nonfiction? And is it any different to nonfiction?
Gosh, there's lots of questions there. You know, I think the key thing I recognized was that it goes back to a sense of authenticity and what I call deep voice.
Right.
I think that at some point, every artist recognizes there's something else within them. And I like this idea of, the Greeks called it the demonic voice, that you're tapping into something that's from the gods, but actually it's within you. And it's something that needs to be articulated. And what you're articulating is an aspect of your own authenticity, but it's also a recognition that there's something about being alive that you need to say. And so I think that what separates fiction from nonfiction, well, I mean, you could go back to De Quincey on that one, the difference between writing of knowledge and writing of power, literature of knowledge, literature of power, that nonfiction very often contributes to knowledge, but it gets out of date eventually, most of the time.
Well, it seems to me that fiction explores the potentially anonymous corners of human experience, whereas nonfiction takes on a more public
human
space.
truth.
Yeah.
We're chasing human truth. And this has been my project all along. I'm interested in trying to articulate in various different ways the problems of being a human being, what it means to be alive, what it means to be in this moment as a human being, where we're trying to define what we are within an enormity, because life, I think, is fundamentally strange. And it's my belief that only fiction can really truly meet this. Only fiction through the sentence can accommodate how truly strange it is.
Why only fiction?
Well, I'm not here to have a go at nonfiction, my gosh. But I think that fiction the sentence can do magic. I think that when you read writers like Woolf or Melville or Faulkner or Joyce, that you see that the sentence has a capability, a protein capability, to push into the furthest reaches of what life is. And I'm interested in that as a writer. I think that a writer's style, or at least my style that I try to create, is a way of meeting the moment of life in its unfolding. And that could mean many different things. It could mean a way of measuring what we know about life, but it can also be a way of measuring the dark matter, what we don't know. And I'm interested in that. I write in the present tense by and large. And the present tense allows you to meet that unfolding moment, but also at the end of that unfolding moment is always the unknown. It's what we don't know. You can call that human blindness. It goes back to the Greeks, but that's my project. I'm deeply, deeply interested in this. So fiction, I think, has that capability to push into this more than any other art form.
So Joyce said what he wanted to do was to recreate life out of life.
Yeah.
Right. And so this present tense moment that you're talking about being in the pulse of the actual.
Yeah.
Right. And you're pushing it. But I'm going to push back on this idea of fiction and non.
You're clearly promoting a nonfiction book here, so we have to be.
Listen, but it's been my project for a long time, because I actually don't recognize the difference anymore between fiction and I also think it's a question of our times. Like, what's true and what's not true, what's fake and what's not fake, and what is it then that the writer must get towards? It's sort of the ineffable fact, love, pride, pity, sacrifice. You talk a lot about power, powerlessness, all of these things. I mean, what's really interesting to me about what you're doing is that you are almost confronting the ineffable facts of human experience. This is what was beautiful to me about the novel as it unfolded. It felt entirely true, and yet it was all spectacularly invented.
Yeah. It is spectacularly invented. I mean, the idea that you'd read this book and this is Dublin. It's the Dublin that we know. It's the known. It's the known world, and yet it's the unknown world. And that was part of the project, was to try and make the familiar, to defamiliarize the familiar. And I think that's really useful in all writing. I think that we're all conditioned. I think that when we read great fiction as kids, or even nonfiction, whatever it is we read, that we're imprinted at a certain age by what we read. We're moved very deeply, and that as we get older, it's harder to impress us.
First book,
The one
in
that
your
really
mind?
burned me was the Mayor Casterbridge when I was 16.
16?
Yeah, I mean, like I sat on the bed and I wept.
You were in
Wept.
Donegal?
I was in Donegal. Yeah, I had long hair. I still have long hair, but even longer. I was a bit of a mettler.
What was it about Mayor Casterbridge then, for a mettler?
The tragic worldview.
Okay.
I'd never seen it articulated so clearly. You know, you got it through Shakespeare, you'd studied Shakespeare at school, but suddenly here was the tragic worldview in language that was closer to my own
You
time.
didn't have Joyce at that stage because we weren't studying Joyce.
No,
we weren't asked to study Joyce.
I didn't read Joyce for the first time properly till I was 18.
Right.
And I remembered vividly. I remember sitting on a bus in Dublin and my head, my neurology just lighting up.
Which book?
It was Portrait of an Artist.
Okay.
And my brain lit up like a Christmas tree. I'll never forget it. And that's when I knew at some level that language was so fundamental to just my sense of self.
Right. And you studied philosophy and you studied
In English. Yeah, I didn't finish though.
At Trinity
UCD.
or UCD
Yeah.
for your sins.
Yeah.
Why didn't you finish?
Well, I like to rationalize it in different ways. I mean, I broke my mother's heart. God, she was so upset. What are you doing? I think I was unhappy with the way English was being taught at the time. I think there was too much theory. There was too much sort of post-structural lenses that had nothing to do with truth or beauty. And truth or beauty are vastly, vastly complex ideas, but they are first principles of great writing. And I felt alienated by what I was listening to. And I don't mean to do down the education, but I just personally was not tuning into it. And at the same time, I was freelancing and building that world. And at one point, they were crossed over, and I just went, I'm going down this road.
But we both know a person, a good friend of both of ours, who remembers you in your mid-20s saying that you were going to write fiction. Lisa Hand.
Really?
Yeah.
I wish she'd told me, reminded me, because I must have been really drunk that night. There was a lot of drinking. Let's just say we used to go to Toners, and I remember one time my friend of mine, Richard Oakley, he edited the Business Post recently, and he went, like, we were about 25, 26, and he went on a session with Lise and Colin in Toners, and then he told me a few days later, I think you're on a stage with Colin, man. What? Why didn't you tell me? I would have been there in a second. But yeah, I mean, the thing is when you go into journalism, it was such an exciting, extraordinarily stimulating world, and like you're seeing, as I said, you're literally inside language,
right?
And I just, and the thing I also realized is, when I was a young man, I was an angry young man, and I was a sensitive, angry young man, and I was not fitting in, and I realized something actually recently, which is perhaps telling of life in Ireland in the 80s, but I realized this when I was reading another book where somebody was talking about how they were treated as by their teachers when they were kids, and how they ended up in therapy over it, and then had to write letters to their teachers who are now dead. And then I remembered that when I was 11, I had a teacher who was actually an amazing teacher, apart from the fact that he used to beat us. And he one day beat the crap out of me because I couldn't do a maths problem.
Right.
That's when it ended. That's when school ended for me. And I went into secondary soon after, and I was finished. I tormented every teacher. I was finished. And I never understood what happened. But that's what happened. And so, my journey swerved at that point. And so, I mean, the thing is now is I've just been appointed at Maynooth University as Distinguished Writing Fellow. And I think literary citizenship is really important. I take the idea very seriously. I think it's important to give back, especially when I have benefited so much. But there's also something healing for me to actually sort of meet that world again.
You're ready to go and teach?
Yeah, I taught last year and I loved it.
Yeah, good.
Because I could see that I'd reached a point where I could communicate something genuinely worthwhile.
Right. So that stamina, that desire, that perseverance are things that you're gonna.
Yeah, but
push us
also, authenticity, about making space for the self in one's life, about how to listen to the self, about how to be receptive to the inner voice, the inner sage, whatever you want to call it. Meditation, the Buddhists, the Christian mystics, the artists of all different persuasions are all chasing this one aspect of mind.
Right.
And it's an aspect of mind that's always available to us. And don't ask me to explain what it is. It has many different names, but it's always there. But the problem is that the times that we live in are so fractured. We are so hammered by the technology that we've unleashed that we're not hearing it.
Right.
And so the first thing I do with students is I decondition them. I get them out of the space that they're in their heads. And I try and reframe for them how important it is to actually do nothing, to be bored, and to start tuning in to that voice and downloading it, divining it, whatever way you do it. And then when you start to get a handle on what that may be, then the real stuff starts to emerge.
So is literature about repair for you?
No.
No.
I think the idea that you write for therapy or that you write to console other people, it's a nice idea, but gosh, it's not for me. I think literature is about truth.
Right.
Fundamentally, I think it's about truth telling to what we are in this condition, that this strange world, and that's very complex.
Tell me about the moment when you caught this book.
So it's really interesting for me to look back on it. I've been writing the wrong book for about 6 months. And I knew it was the wrong book. I was tormented. And it's happened to me before. And I kept turning up anyway. I thought, you have to just keep writing. Something will unlock. And it was just getting worse and worse. It was failing and failing more until it reached the point when actually failure can be highly productive. But this is
Vivifying, yeah.
This is actually not it. I have not created a vessel. I've not created a container with which to tell a story and hold all my obsessions. It's not a story. It's not.
What was it about?
I can't talk about it because if I ever sell my literary estate, it's going to just disappear. It was so embarrassing.
So the best question to, like, what is a
Yeah.
book about? Is it, did
Yeah.
you say it's about $25.99,
Yeah.
or it's about 150 pages, or
Yeah.
250
Yeah.
pages?
It was so I.
What was the book about? Come on, tell us.
Well, it was like some sort of refugee city that doesn't exist.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but it was just not working. And
Yeah, but you're edging into this.
the themes
this-
were that
th-
I
th-
was.
this
You see, you
territory.
come at the themes from different directions.
Of course, yes.
You know, you're testing things, and so there was
Did you find a sentence, or did you find an idea that led you to this?
Well, I had one opening sentence that I kept coming back to again and again, and then I snuck it into the book later on.
Okay, which sentence is that?
Let me see. Can I say it? This time of life.
Can you read it? Can you read it?
Oh gosh, can I
I
find
really
it?
want for him to
well,
read, because
I will do a reading, but I don't know if I can find the sentence at high speed.
Oh, okay.
But I'll tell this story while I search for the sentence, right? which
What's
was-
interesting to me about Paul and his work is that the music is as important as meaning, and sometimes maybe more important than the meaning itself. So that the texture of the sentence, and that's why I'm really interested to hear you. Give us a half
Well,
page.
so the fail book actually began with this. It begins halfway through, but I'll just start with the first sentence here. Is watching the light upon the beach, thinking, this time of light, that was the opening. How the days pass by, gathering the light and releasing light into night, and we reach but cannot touch nor take what passes, what seems to pass, time's dream. And I was I had that sentence and I just needed to write a book out of it. But it wasn't happening. And there was a Friday and I just went, okay, I need to stop. And Com Tobin once said, I mean, perhaps very wisely, finish everything you start. And I say, actually, sometimes you have to know when to stop. So I pulled the plug and I said, okay, I had this feeling, this intuition, this sense that there was something else there, something waiting. And I did not know what it was. I had no idea. I said, I will do nothing this weekend. I will turn back. I'll return to the desk on Monday morning and I will see what happens. And this is the thing that you, as an artist, you know this, you learn to trust the spooky sense. You learn to trust the intuition. You learn to trust the door into the dark.
Yeah.
And that you trust that the door is going to stay open for you.
Yeah.
And I trusted and I turned up on the Monday morning and I created a new document, new page, and I sat and I waited and I closed my eyes and then I just wrote and I wrote the first page.
Read it first, please.
The night has come and she has not heard the knocking, standing at the window looking out onto the garden. How the dark gathers without sound the cherry trees. It gathers the last of the leaves, and the leaves do not resist the dark, but accept the dark in whisper. Tired now, the day almost behind her, all that still has to be done before bed, and the children settled in the living room, this feeling of rest for a moment by the glass, watching the darkening garden and the wish to be at one with this darkness, to step outside and lie down with it, to lie with the fallen leaves and let the night pass over, to wake then with the dawn and rise renewed with the morning come. But the knocking. She hears it pass into thought, the sharp, insistent rapping, each knock possessed, so fully of the knocker she begins to frown. Then Bailey, too, is knocking on the glass door to the kitchen. He calls out to her, "Ma'am," pointing to the hallway without lifting his eyes from the screen. Eilish finds her body moving towards the hall with the baby in her arms. She opens the front door and two men are standing before the porch glass, almost faceless in the dark. She turns on the porch light and the men are known in an instant from how they are stood. The night cold air suspiring, it seems, as she slides open the patio door. The suburban quiet, the rain falling almost unspoken onto St. Lawrence Street upon the black car parked in front of the house. How the men seem to carry the feeling of the night. Let me just say, the interesting thing about that for me is I look back now, and even though I did not know what I was doing, the meaning of the entire book is encoded in the opening sentences.
The writers never know what they're
We
doing.
don't know, but it's my belief there is way back there under the trap door
Right.
in the subconscious. There is some knowledge.
Yeah, the
But you
big
can't
lie is
see
that
it.
we're aware of it.
Yeah, you're not
You
aware.
know, you just
Yeah.
go by the seat of your pants, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and I can feel that because that's where something deeply truthful comes in. But let's talk about this knock on the door.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the police. Let's talk about the political or non-political nature of this novel. For me, what was absolutely astounding was that this was taking place in Ireland, where it could never take place. And therefore, it was saying it is taking place absolutely everywhere. This, for me, was what was the triumph, because I would say this is impossible in Ranelagh and Temple Ogue and wherever else it happens to be. It's absolutely impossible. And then its impossibility became possible, and that was when it sort of shook me. And then I realized I was reading about the United States, I was reading about Syria, I was reading about like a sort of everywhere. And so I appreciated you having the bravery to take it into a geography where most people would not put it.
Yeah. I realized looking back on this that there's so many things that go into the writing of a novel, and my editor Juliet maybe she's had slagged me off a few times saying you've said at least 3 origin stories, but there's one thing I haven't actually said, and I was writing a screenplay for a friend of mine who's a TV director, and we had this idea for a film, and it was about a Syrian refugee in Dublin, and but there was a scene that I had to write for him where I needed to portray what she had left behind. And my friend said, well, you can't do that. That's going to cost 5 million quid. And if we get this made, you know, we just can't. And the thing about formal restrictions are actually magnificent spurs to creativity.
Right.
And I thought, well, how am I going to articulate this? And so I ended up writing a scene where she falls asleep on the Lewis, but she wakes
The
up.
Lewis is the train.
The Lewis is the tram in Dublin. But as she wakes up, what she's actually seeing is what she went through, but in Dublin. And she sees like a sniper, and so there was a layer, one layer on top of another layer.
Right.
That was my creative solution, and that went in, and it stayed with me,
Right.
and that then became part of the formula. And as I
That's
was
the bullet to the back of the brain.
yeah, and you know, as I was writing this book, I realized that the beauty of the simulation is that, and the simulation in present tense, so to speak, is that it allows the reader to experience this as though they are going through it themselves. They're experiencing something that is inconceivable. And this is the problem with modern life. It's the problem with the spectacle that we get on the TV news every night. We watch the news, we eat our dinner, and we cannot actually truly experience or feel what we see. And so I'm 46 and I've grown up with the spectacle. So what I see no longer has any impact on me. That troubles me, because perhaps if we truly felt what we saw, well, maybe we would not be able to get on with our day. We might not even be able to get out of bed in the morning. And so I thought that perhaps there's a way for fiction to sort of do this, for fiction to get past the self-defenses that we put up, for fiction to get beyond the spectacle, and to bring us back to that place as though we know the world for the first time again, except it's that world. At which point you move past sympathy and you arrive at empathy.
Interesting. And we talked about radical empathy and this sort of thing. I'm going to ask you, you know, Gramsci talks about being a pessimist of reality and an optimist of the will, you know, and you can be a pes optimist.
Yeah,
almost.
I'm
I
definitely
mean,
a pes optimist.
you're a
Yeah,
pes
yeah,
optimist.
yeah. I
mean,
like that.
so
I love that.
it's
Brilliant.
So you know, I am interested in your notion of how, well, I don't want to give too much away, but how do we get out of this book?
How do we get out of it?
Yeah, like, and because I had a
You
talk
mean-
with
you
the
mean-
New York Times, and because they were asking me about you, and she said, well, maybe it's not so optimistic. I thought, oh, there's a certain optimism at the end. And I'm not going to give away the book, but she gets on a boat.
This guy, right? My gosh.
So, but I am interested. Are you? You say you're a pes optimist, but where do you lean in this debate?
It's
between
it's
optimism and
tricky
pessimism?
territory, because Stendhal said that, you know, politics is the millstone around the neck of literature and drowns it in less than 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's true.
It's all about
It-
cupidity.
If you set out with a message,
Yeah.
then you're just airing a grievance.
Right.
And serious fiction has to be about grief. It has to be about this thing that is beyond us. It has to be about loss. It has to be about the incomprehensible, about our fundamental powerlessness in life. These are big metaphysical questions. I'm interested in these things. And I think that it's more important in this book that I frame the questions rather than the answers.
Right.
And so I've been asked a number of times, like, what's your solution? And I mean, the pessimist in me will say, well, the book already has an attitude to that. And the attitude is what Eilish realizes later in the book, after the unraveling has occurred, the profound unraveling of a liberal democracy into the abyss.
Mm.
And Eilish, or Eilish, as you can call her too, depending on where you're from, Eilish recognizes she has this epiphany, and she realizes that the end of the world is actually not some Armageddon. It's not some biblical catastrophe. It's actually a local event, and it's reoccurring throughout time. It's reoccurring right now in Gaza or Ukraine or anywhere where there is a destruction That's the end of the world for people who are dying in those places. And that it comes to your city, it comes to your town, and it knocks on your door. But for everybody else, it's an event on the news. It's the spectacle. Over time, it becomes it becomes a myth. It becomes folklore. And so that's my tragic worldview. That's the pessimist in me.
I want people to see another side of you too. And I'm going to open it to questions here in just a few minutes, so get them ready. Paul Lynch, 6 years ago, arrives in New York. What happens?
Was actually when I was leaving New York, I had an event, and my friend Will Chancellor was there, and there was 3 people from the publisher, and my ex-wife was there, and that was it. Nobody came. So this is marvelous. Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it.
Are you happy?
There is a genuine sense of validation that comes. I mean, so the thing about the Booker is so few are chosen, and you genuinely don't believe that you're going to be one of the elect. But 90% of novelists will admit that they want to win it, and the other 10% are just lying about that. So yes, I did want to win it, but I never thought it would happen. And the thing about me is I never played it down the center of the court. I've always played it to the edges of the court. I've always tried to find the line for what's dangerous for me. I've always tried to push fiction in my own way and to my own vision. And I've as Kafka said, do not bend, do not water it down. And I never watered it down. And so the idea that I might find myself at the center of the culture seemed a bit strange. And I genuinely never believed it would happen. And I actually had a moment sort of early summer last year where I was sitting in my writing room and I thought, this has been hard. And I've been broke an awful lot of times. And it's put a lot of strain on my life. But I have to do this and I have to keep doing it. And if nothing ever happens, if there's never a breakthrough moment in my fiction, it doesn't matter. I am determined to just do this until it's done with me or I'm done with it.
I wanted to ask you that. That's great that you answered that. So I asked you, are you happy? Now I'm going to ask you, are you scared?
Yes, I'm terrified. Yeah, because it's that sense of, well, now they want to know what you do next. I asked, we were chatting about that on the way here, and I'd like to believe that when I do sit down, when I disappear, because you do disappear when you write. That other self, I call it the demonic, it takes over. I'd like to believe that will be true and pure. And maybe I'll just swerve on the next book and do something weird. I'll stun the world with my ingratitude.
Yeah. Well, I think you will swerve, and I think having read all the books now from the very beginning, I'm delighted that you're in this place that you are now. I know you've also had some personal things. You had some health problems and done all this stuff, and it's amazing to see you here. And I'm going to open up the floor to whatever questions that people have, and you can ask them anything. How is he going to spend?
Statements, right? Please.
Everybody wants to know, how is he going to spend all the money?
Gosh, Jesus.
No, first
in New
question right
York
here.
in a weekend.
Oh, here we
Hiya.
got microphones going around.
I've heard that there's no paragraph breaks. Was that to make the book seem more frantically paced, or?
We save money on the paper.
There's no quotation marks as well, but I don't use quotation marks when I speak, and there's no paragraph marks in our interaction. And I think reality is fluid, and that might be one reason. But there is a deeper reason. There's a serious reason, and it's when you sit down to write a novel, you're looking for the mesh, the form that holds it all together. You're looking to make choices that serve the reader, because every choice you make must associate back to the meaning of the book. So if you're making a choice to do some sort of modernist flourish because it looks good, that is pretentious. But if you're doing something that articulates the meaning of the book, then you're on the right path. And the book said to me, I was writing with paragraphs and the book just said, no, take them out. And I took them out, and suddenly there was the feeling of what was occurring. There was the feeling of inevitability. There was the feeling for Eilish of being imprisoned in a reality that was moving inevitably towards something that was terrifying. And so there's no white space because there's no room for her to turn.
So Beckett said in the early 80s in an interview, he said it's the job of the artist now to find a form that accommodates the mess.
I love that.
Yeah, which is,
I love that. I'm
which is
writing that
fucking
down.
Great. Yeah. We have questions. I think I saw some hands over here. Please, thank you.
Hi. Who are a couple of your favorite up and coming authors that we probably haven't heard of yet?
Well, I actually wrote a fan letter to a Mexican writer called Fernanda Melchor, who wrote a book called Hurricane Season, and it was her first book, and it just completely floored me. I mean, like, it left me gasping. I felt like I was reading a future Nobel winner, a genuine master, and she tuned into the Southern Gothic, the writers like Faulkner, McCarthy, O'Connor, and she had appropriated it for herself, brought it south, re-articulated it for the abyss that is her country now, that is modern Mexico, and really pushed the language into a space right down into this almost mythic but also psychic space that was very pure, very scary. And it takes astonishing courage to write a novel like that.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can't.
Okay, perfect. Finally brought up Fernanda Melchor because I wrote her in my question I'm about to ask you. Thank you, Paul, for being here and present with us here in the space and time. I'm not sure if your book, Prophet Song, will ever leave me. And I think Prophet Song is a seance to the dead, to those who have experienced an apocalypse before, and reverberates with what we're seeing presently with the genocide in Gaza. I've seen many book reviews compare Prophet Song to dystopian titles like 1984 and The Handmaid's Tale, and I agree with your rejection of Prophet Song being labeled a dystopian novel. And I see Prophet Song more like a turning prism of contemporary realism. I think Prophet Song is more accurately in conversation with a book like Hurricane Season by Mexican writer Fernanda Melchor.
Right? Thank you.
Her work was recently translated to English. You already know this. Melchor uses block text like you, which I think intensifies this defiled feeling the reader experiences, while underlying her torrential downpour, she has a radical empathy for victims of patriarchal violence. Her books have been described as a literary MRI, not necessarily books about Mexico. I thought about this, especially with your scene of Eilish breastfeeding her teething child and passing on her trauma, and your opposite choice of setting Prophet Song in Ireland. Do you see Prophet Song as a literary MRI, and what are you probing?
Well, I'm just amused at the at how Hurricane Season, reappeared there. What are you asking?
See Prophet Song as a literary MRI, and what are you probing in that?
I mean, at this point, I don't know what to make of it. I really don't know what to make of it. You know, I don't think you set out with this to make a statement. You want to create a prism through which we can see the present, but also the past and the future. And one of the reasons it's not dystopian is because the book is there's so much conversation with the past occurring in the book that immediately just renders it not dystopian, but that also dystopian fiction is very it tends to be paper mache a little bit sometimes, you know, and I like to deepen the real in this book and explode the form. That was something I wanted to do. But I mean, at this point, I don't know what it's meant to be. I don't know.
That's a really good answer.
Yeah.
Look, that's a really, really, really good answer, because we're living in a time that's diseased with certainty, and you're always asked to, to have the right answer. The best answer is saying, I don't fucking know.
Keats called it negative capability.
Negative capability is really interesting.
Yeah, you know, he said
Explain
negative capability is writing towards the unknown, writing towards the lack of an answer,
Right.
and that writing away from certainty,
Right.
into
Exactly. Away from
uncertainty.
certainty.
And he suggested that Shakespeare was the writer who had the greatest amount of negative capability, and that
That's
you
right.
should judge a writer, the greatness of a writer, by how much negative capability is in the text.
That the poets had
Yeah.
and one of the reasons I think that negative capability hasn't caught on as a like a trendy idea is it uses the word negative in it. But check out Keats when and he talks about listen, poets are really important to you.
They are, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, poetry was fundamental to me as a kid. I mean, when I was talking about Thomas Hardy, I was also reading T.S. Eliot at the time,
Right.
you know, and Gerard Manley Hopkins. Oh my gosh. I mean, Hopkins again, like that Joyce on the bus. I felt my brain literally being rewired. And I look back now on Red Sky and Morning, and in that book, I was pushing the
Kingdom of
sentences.
Daylight's Dolphin, Dapple Dawn, Dawn Folk, and
Yeah. I was pushing the sentences in that book towards
Yeah,
this
yeah.
point where prose and poetry were just melding into
Yeah,
the
yeah.
one space. But I can see Hopkins all over that book now. He was completely infused,
Oh yeah.
you know, and
Inscape.
he's one of my masters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any more questions? We have one here and another one here, and then we've got three more questions. Okay.
I have one here.
So-
Many years ago, Philip Roth wrote that everything that's taking place in the world today beggars the imagination that writers, the material that writers can come up with. Was he right? Was he wrong? How do you challenge that? Or how do you just shrug your shoulders in the face of it?
Say I don't know.
I'm just going to shrug my shoulders. I'm really sorry. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, like.
I was just wondering, do you feel that a Dublin reader, you've had success in France, a Paris reader or a New York reader, that'll hit them a little differently, or do you feel a reader's a reader's a reader?
Well, I think that what I strive for in my writing is a sort of almost mythic purity. I try to drill past cultural differences. I try to get down to some sort of elemental truth about the human condition, about what we are always, not what we are now, not what we are within our society, but the fundamental truths of what it means to be a human being. And I think that if I can arrive at that, which I hope that I'm doing, then something is transmitted way beyond the surface of difference. And that's, Borges once said that great writers survive the errata of mistranslation. But I also think that great writers survive the errata of culture and different cultures and otherness and so on.
I just got a message that our mics are not working. Are our mics working well enough? They are good. They are. And we've got two, maybe three more questions.
Paul, from the first sentence of Red Sky and Morning, I was convinced. I was like, this is a person with a lyric sensibility, right? This is a voice that's singing and shaping these sentences really precisely. And what I want to ask about is your publisher and your editor, because a lot of people would try to beat that out of someone, would try to shape it in a certain way. And I know that when you won the prize, Keelan Hughes said something or wrote something that she said, every writer should have a publisher that they can look at that way, or maybe it was the reverse. And so I wondered if you'd say something about the luck involved and who you work with that's brought your books out, that has allowed you to maintain really the integrity of your own voice, because I don't think everybody has that experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm teaching in a university now, but one of the things I teach is that it is the core idea of your own voice, your integrity, and that it's really fundamental to your truth. And that, language, the beauty of language is that the freer it is, the freer your imagination is. It's one of the reasons why I think Irish writing is so powerful, is that we have an ability with language to bend it to our will, and that opens by itself new doors. And so I've had a project, but I never studied writing myself. So I went rogue, and nobody told me to rein it in. And so I went rogue, and it was challenging without a doubt. I was very lucky for my third book, Grace, that I arrived in London at the door of Juliet, maybe with One World. And the interesting thing about Juliet is that One World is she set up the house with her husband Noveen. They were a non-fiction house for about 25 years, and then in I think 2009 she started publishing fiction. But she published fiction that she just liked, and she really doesn't give too much of a damn about commercial aspect of it. She doesn't do profit and loss accounting. She kind of laughed at that when I asked her, "Do you do profit and loss?" She just tittered a little bit. And she publishes what she likes, what speaks to her. And so she's published writing that's challenging and interesting and not always not to everybody's taste, but it's to her taste. That's the thing. She's shaped a house around what she likes. But by doing that, she's published 3 writers in, I think, literally the space of 10 years that have won the Booker Prize. And so she's an extraordinary editor. And a lot of the time, those writers were writers who were rejected by the mainstream houses, which were playing it safe. And that's what's happened with the conglomeration of so much publishing, and the accountants have taken over, and it's harder for the risk takers to get through. But I genuinely believe that the writers who are resilient, who believe, who are granitically indifferent to all of those challenges, do get through. And so long as they keep turning up, they keep doing the work, they will get there.
Nice answer.
I wanted to ask you about your writing process and where you write. Colm has shared many times where he does it and his discipline of early in the day writing. And how do you approach it?
I used to be a super early writer. There's that great quote from DeLillo, "Puddled in dream melt." I think there's so much truth to that about the liminal space that you're in when you wake up. But I have children, and on the days when I have my kids, I have to bring them to school. So I've had to change my writing routine to actually accommodate that. So the thing that I have in my favor is I'm a meditator. And so I'm able to create that puddled in dream melt feeling any time of the day. But what I do is when I have a book and when I'm chasing a book is I'm very, very rigorous. I think, discipline is fundamental, and I start work at 10 a.m. and I turn up every day. And I used to drink coffee, but I don't drink coffee anymore. But I've learned that at 10 a.m. I'm ready. And I was pouring coffee into me for years and drinking more and more coffee just to get back to the level that I'm at now when I don't drink coffee. So I found it's much easier not to drink the coffee, and I'm the same every day. And I just go at it, and I'm very, very disciplined about it. I keep my hours, and I turn my damn phone off. I don't have internet in my studio. It's really important. And I have, certain things that I do that help also get me into the space. I like to listen to brown noise. I find that it just alienates the world, switches it off. And I like to write in certain fonts, and I set my page up so it looks like the page of a manuscript, of a book. And these things just help get me into the space. They're rituals, and the ritual is very, very important for for writing. And that's it. And I just keep going at it. I just keep doing it until there's something there. And I've realized over the years, that you start out on your own, and you start out, you've committed you've committed yourself to answering something inside you. It's a feeling. Art begins as a feeling. And you start out with the sentences, and you start out with the paragraphs, and you're building something, and you're building this thing that's actually a cantilever bridge out over a void. And there's mist and there's fog, and you keep going. And the bridge at some point it reaches the other side, and you realize there's this thing, you've created it, and it holds. And then you ask your friends to walk across the bridge, and they don't want to walk across the bridge, but they walk across anyway. And I think it's good. I think it's okay. And then you ask your agent to walk across the bridge. Your agent starts shaking it and jumping up and down. And your agent says, I think we could maybe sell the bridge. And then people are walking across. Your editor wants to buy the bridge. And then there's salespeople, and there's production editors, and there's publicists. And they're all walking around the bridge. And suddenly there's a community of people there's booksellers and there's librarians, and they're turning up and they're telling people, they're whispering imploringly, there's this bridge.
And there's the critic with the 6-pack of dynamite.
Yeah, the critic doesn't like the color of the pillars, and it's too wide and it's too ornate, and you're like, but I built the bridge the way I wanted it to be built for a reason.
Well done. Well done. We have one here, and then I think that's it, right? Am I correct? Yes. Or do we have one or two?
Gosh,
Sorry.
can I take two and then
Two. Yeah.
my brain is
Yeah.
burning out.
Hi, you've been a prolific film critic, and this book has already been sold TV rights and film rights.
No, it hasn't.
Oh, that's what I
No,
read.
no, not
Is-
yet.
Oh, okay. Well, will you be involved, and
Buy
how
'em
will you
tonight.
be involved?
Will I be involved if it's?
Yeah, I imagine it's going to be
Well,
sold at some point.
I'm a fastidious control freak, so
That's what I mean.
yes, I will be involved. Yeah.
You will be a producer, you will be,
I don't know. If that happens, or if it were to happen, then I will be involved to some degree because I'm a control freak. Sorry. Yeah.
whatever I read is fake news.
Where did you read that? What? No. Post-truth, everybody. Post-truth.
We have one more.
One more
Is
question.
that correct? And then we maybe don't have one more.
Oh, great.
Um,
Wonderful.
No, we have one more right at the back there, and then down there, and
I just want to say, actually,
Okay.
before the question comes, that if you'd said to me, 10 years ago, that I would be in this chair, being interviewed by Colin McCann, a writer who's very dear to me, very important to me, I would have been astonished. I would have fallen off my chair. So this means a lot to me,
means a lot to me
and
too.
thank you.
Thank
And when I was writing, when my first book was being published, Colin put his name on the jacket with some words, and that was very meaningful to me. And it also opened doors, and it goes back to the idea of literary citizenship. And Colin is one of the great literary citizens. So there you are.
That's very nice. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Finished now. So we have one more. Then listen, we're going to go downstairs. I think we're going to have a glass of wine, and we're going to buy books. Buy them for for Christmas and the Christmas thereafter, and keep buying books. That's the most important thing. Last question.
Hello. I'm fascinated by the fact that you come from a film criticism background, and I was wondering how deeply influencing that process was for you. Do you think of your novels cinematically when you're in the process of putting them together?
It's a chicken and egg thing. My imagination is just very visual. So was I drawn to cinema because I'm attracted to the visual, perhaps? But at the same time, cinema influenced my writing. And there are film directors like Robert Bresson, who's very dear to me. And he's in my writing. He's very deeply in my writing. And I remember when I first saw Robert Bresson, it was before I was writing fiction, and I had this thought, gosh, if I ever write fiction, I want it to be like a Bresson film. And there was that sense of that what is revealed through behavior, there's no telling. It's just all behavior. It's all revelation. But at the same time, there is this astonishing spiritual purity that emerges. And I just thought that's the way to do it. But there's many filmmakers that work quietly in my books.
Thank you so much.